Um, I would like to welcome all of you to this EU-PolarNet APECS webinar on who owns the Arctic, with which we would like to give you an introduction to the Arctic governments. The webinar is jointly organized by EU-PolarNet 2 and by APECS. And one of the tasks of EU-PolarNet 2 is to inform colleagues and decision makers about polar topics of high relevance. And within this framework, we are organizing this webinar today, and we will certainly organize more webinars similar to this in the future. We also think that this webinar comes timely, also the topic of the webinar, because questions about stewardship and governance of the Arctic are being asked more frequently. And of course, this is due to the increasing interest and also awareness about the significance of the Arctic for global climate, but also for economy. But also the current geopolitical situation is increasing the interest, but also the problems for the Arctic, and especially its governance is currently very much challenged. Volker Rachold, the head of the German Arctic office, will now introduce the quite complex Arctic governments to you. We have asked Volker to present these topics not only because he's leading the German Arctic office, which is the kind of information and cooperation hub for German stakeholders interested in the Arctic, but we also asked him because he was the executive secretary of the International Arctic Science Committee, and served there, I think, for more than 10 years. Volker's former research has focused on land-ocean interactions in the Siberian Arctic, and he also led several land and ship-based Russian-German expeditions. I'm looking forward to your talk, Volker. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for organizing this, and thank you, Annelie, for moderating this and facilitating this. So, yeah, thanks for the nice introduction. Yeah, it's always my pleasure to talk about a really highly relevant topic, I believe, and also to talk about some of the mistakes that some people do when they think about the Arctic. The Arctic is certainly not no man's land, so there's governance structures, and I try to go through these governance structures and also explain why they are really challenged, especially at the moment. So I try to share my slide here, see if that works. So I hope you can see my slides. So yeah, who owns the Arctic? That's the question. And of course, I go a bit beyond that. The answering that question, I go to the, let's say, what kind of structures exist in the Arctic, how is the Arctic governed, and what kind of challenges we have to expect for the next years that we have at the moment, actually. So firstly, in the news, you very often see interesting articles about interest in the Arctic, and just want to start with a few to open the topic. One that certainly triggered lots of comments in the media was when Russia planted the Russian flag on the North Pole in 2007, I believe it was, and of course everyone thought, can Russia just claim the North Pole? Is it so simple? Is it like in the Wild West that you plant a flag and it's yours? Of course, it's not, and we'll talk about it a bit later. The next thing that happened just 2 years later, when China stated that they consider themselves a near-Arctic state, and of course, China has no Arctic territory and is not really, so of course, interested in the Arctic and active in the Arctic, but of course, claiming to be a near-Arctic state also triggered some discussions, especially in the Arctic countries. And there are many things happening, especially with the Arctic opening, the sea ice disappearing, and the Arctic getting more accessible. Another one happened in 2019 during the Finnish chairmanship of the Arctic Council, when State Secretary Mike Pompeo made a speech at the Arctic Council in Rovaniemi, where he talked about mainly talked about economic interests in the Arctic, he talked about security interests, and actually blaming China and Russia. Which, of course, for the Arctic Council was a very unusual thing, because the Arctic Council, we can talk about that a bit later, does not handle business, does not handle security issues, but focuses on very concrete issues. So that triggered a bit of discussion. And then a few months later, Donald Trump made the offer to buy Greenland. And of course, people were surprised, and the reaction from Denmark and Greenland was quite reserved and just said Greenland is not for sale. But these kind of examples illustrate what challenges we have in the Arctic and what people think about the Arctic. Of course, the biggest challenge that just happened a few months ago was when Russia attacked Ukraine and started a war in the Ukraine. And of course, that has not only dramatic implications for the people in the Ukraine, but also on the political level, also for the Arctic, and also on the scientific level for the Arctic. And we'll talk about that a bit more later, what that means for the Arctic and how that actually changed the Arctic as we've known it before. But before, let's answer the question, who owns the Arctic? So firstly, of course, we have to realize the Arctic is an ocean surrounded by land, unlike the Antarctic, which is a continent surrounded by an ocean. And this land, of course, is the land of or territory of 8 sovereign states. So the question asks who owns the Arctic is very simple. Of course, the land is under the ownership and governance of each of the Arctic countries. So the only thing we can talk about is the Central Arctic Ocean, here international waters, which does not belong to any country. So, but of course, also for this Central Arctic Ocean, and that some of the things we see when somebody plants the flag or claims parts of the Central Arctic Ocean, also here we see, of course, interests of the 8 Arctic countries, and which means that they all try to claim as much as possible of the Arctic Ocean seafloor. And this is absolutely okay and legal and possible because we have the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, and there is an article number 76 which states that if the country can document that the seafloor extending beyond their 200-mile economic zone geologically belongs to their mainland, they have the right to claim that. That is something which is not only for the Arctic, that is relevant for any ocean in the world. It's a legal thing in the United Nations Convention of the Law, and of course all the countries in the Arctic are doing that. So, and what you see here on this map is the claims that we currently have. So there are claims from Canada, from Denmark, from Norway, from Russia. There is none from the US because the US has not signed or has not ratified the Convention on the Law of the Sea. So the US cannot claim any territory. But what you also see that these claims are overlapping. So actually, 3 countries are claiming the North Pole. So Canada, Denmark, and Russia. So these claims are now submitted to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. There's a committee that has to evaluate these claims and has to figure out if the scientific documents that they provide with their claims are appropriate and are really justifying their claim. And then at some point, of course, this ocean floor in the Central Arctic Ocean will be divided between the 8 Arctic countries. This is a long process. It will not happen within the next few years. It's a long process. And then, of course, it can well happen that some areas are claimed by 2 countries, and both claims are justified. And then, of course, these 2 countries have to arrange bilaterally and decide how they want to handle it. So it's a complicated thing, but absolutely in accordance with international law. So there's nothing illegal about it. So UN Convention of the Law of the Sea is really the most important thing when it comes to ownership and governance. But there are many other global bodies that are also relevant for the Arctic, of course. And it's listed in here that you have them for completeness. So, of course, there's the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, responsible for the Paris Climate Agreement. There's the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. We've talked about the UNCLOS already. And there's the International Maritime Organization. And they are especially important also for the Arctic, and we come to that in a minute with regards to the Polar Code, which is a regulatory document that talks about how shipping in the Arctic Ocean has to be organized. There's another one which is a bit more regional. This is the OSPAR Convention. So these global bodies, they have, of course, adopted a lot of global agreements which are relevant for any place in the world, also for the Arctic. We're listing here, so there's the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, there is the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer, an international treaty designed to protect the ozone layer, of course very relevant for the polar regions. There is the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, POPs, International Environmental Treaty to eliminate and restrict the production and use of these chemicals. And finally, there's the Minamata Convention on Mercury, also highly relevant for the Arctic because mercury is accumulating in the food chain in the Arctic and that's not only affecting animals but also people, indigenous peoples living from fish and other sources in the Arctic. Talking about the Arctic, let's go back a bit in history because the Arctic is a very special region and I would even say it has been considered kind of a model region for international cooperation, and we will see why and how this developed. And I want to go back to a very famous speech that time President of the Arctic Federation, Soviet Union at the time, Mikhail Gorbachev made in Murmansk in 1987. And there he really focused on the Arctic, and he made 7 important points. He said, first of all, he wanted to talk about burning security issues. He said that the Soviet Union proposes consultations between the Warsaw Treaty and the NATO on restricting military, and also, especially on the Arctic. Thirdly, he said that they attach, of course, great importance to the peaceful cooperation in developing the resources of the North. Fourthly, the scientific exploration of the Arctic is of immense importance. And the fifth, they attach special importance to the cooperation of the northern countries in environmental protection. At that time, environmental protection was not climate change, which was not really identified as an issue. It was more long transported chemicals and other contaminants. And as the last thing, the sixth thing, he said that the Northern Sea route is very important for the Soviet Union, and they would open this for foreign ships and providing a service of icebreakers. So if you look at these points, I think they are today still quite relevant, and of course that triggered really discussions within the 8 Arctic countries. And at that time, in the beginning, the 8 Arctic countries were considered only 5 countries, the coastal countries. But shortly after, they realized that also Finland and Sweden that do not have coastline to the Arctic Ocean are Arctic countries, and also Iceland was added to the list so that there are 8 Arctic countries. So and what happened is that Finland started and invited the 8 Arctic countries on a discussion on how to cooperate in the Arctic. And what came out of the discussion was the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy, which was adopted in 1991. Today it's known as the Finnish Initiative or the Rovaniemi process. So that was the first kind of initial Arctic Council. They established already 4 working groups, which are still active today in the Arctic Council. So Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment, Emergency Prevention, Preparedness and Response, and Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna. So kind of the first Arctic Council. And it took a bit more time, another 5 years. And especially Canada wanted to extend the work of this initial environmental protection strategy. And then with the Ottawa Declaration in 1996, the Arctic Council was founded. So here's the photo of the 20th anniversary celebration in Fairbanks at the Arctic Council meeting. You can see it on the picture somewhere, but I don't know where I'm somewhere. I'm so small here. So a bit about the Arctic Council structure. The Arctic Council is, of course, a body of the 8 Arctic countries, and the main working instruments are the 6 working groups. So in addition to the 4 that were already established during the environmental protection strategy, the mandate was extended to include sustainable development of the Arctic. And that is why the Sustainable Development Working Group was established. Much later, there was a more, let's say, more pragmatic working group works on contaminants, so Arctic Contaminants Action Program, which is a working group really to respond to issues of contaminant in the Arctic and programs to eliminate contaminants which are already there. The most important thing, I think, for the Arctic Council is the participation of the indigenous peoples of the Arctic. And they are sitting in the Arctic Council as permanent participants. So it's 6 organizations of the indigenous peoples in the Arctic, and it's in a unique setting that the indigenous peoples sit at the same table with the ministers of the Arctic Council and have a say in everything that the Arctic Council is doing. So they are consulted on anything, and if they don't like things won't be done. And this is a very unique setting in the Arctic Council. And then, of course, there are lots of states and organizations as observers on the Arctic Council, a growing number of observers contributing to the work of the Arctic Council, mainly on the level of the working groups by providing scientific expertise and knowledge and supporting the activities of the Arctic Council working groups. So the Arctic Council is a primary intergovernmental forum dedicated to discussion of the work on Arctic issues with 2 foci. One is environmental protection, that was there from the very beginning, and it goes back to the speech of Gorbachev, actually. And the other one is sustainable development of the region. So these are the 2 focus areas of the Arctic Council still today. And then, of course, including discussions with the indigenous peoples organizations and numerous observers. It has to be clear that the guidelines and recommendations of the Council are not legally binding for the countries, which means that the Arctic Council prepares documents very often based on assessments that the working groups do, which include recommendations for policymakers. And these are then forwarded to the countries, and it's their responsibility to implement them nationally. However, the Arctic Council is also used by the member countries just as a forum to negotiate legally binding agreements. And the Arctic Council has been very successful in doing that over the years, and has in the last years triggered or initiated 3 legally binding agreements. The first one in 2011 already on cooperation of aeronautical and marine search and rescue in the Arctic. The second one on the marine oil pollution preparedness and response in the Arctic in 2013. And the last one, also of course important for us as scientists, is the agreement on enhancing international Arctic scientific cooperation. A very interesting agreement because initially it was designed as an agreement between the 8 Arctic countries, but it was in the development realized that, of course, also the non-Arctic countries have to be somehow part of that agreement. So they are not really signing the agreement, but still the agreement is also applicable for their activities. So a very important agreement. 2 other agreements that should be mentioned in that context, which have nothing to do with the Arctic Council, but of course are extremely important. One that I already mentioned is the International Code for Ships Operating in Polar Regions. It's a regulatory document explaining what kind of equipment a ship has, what kind of training the crew has to have, and many other regulations, regulatory documents, how shipping in the Arctic should work. This is relevant also for the Antarctic, so it works for both poles. And one important thing is that for the Antarctic, it already includes a ban of this heavy oil, which produces all the black carbon in the polar regions. And this will also be implemented, or is planned to be implemented in 2024, also for the Arctic waters. So that from then on, heavy oil for ships is not allowed anymore. There's another one that was signed, the latest one that was signed in 2018, that was initiated by the 5 Arctic Ocean coastal states, so Canada, Kingdom of Denmark, Norway, Russia, and the United States, but also signed by Iceland, by the European Union, Japan, Korea, and China, so the big fishery countries, and that prevents unregulated high seas fisheries in the central Arctic Ocean. So it's designed in a way that before this fishing will be allowed, there needs to be a scientific base, a scientific understanding what it means, so that scientists have several years now to study the Arctic Ocean before this agreement will end and high sea fisheries in the Arctic Ocean will be allowed. So as I said, the Arctic Council has a very clear mandate. It focuses on environmental protection and sustainable development. But of course, there are other issues where also the Council thought that this should be somehow managed. So they initiated some kind of offsprings. And one is the Arctic Economic Council, facilitating sustainable business in the Arctic. So it's a consortium of an independent organization. It's linked to the Arctic Council somehow. It's the same, uses the same facilities in Tromsø, and it helps business activities to work together and to discuss joint activities in the Arctic. As I said, nothing to do with the Arctic Council, but initiated by the Arctic Council. The biggest issue in the Arctic that the Arctic Council has always, from the very beginning, deliberately not dealt with is security. But of course, there are security discussions in the Arctic, getting more and more relevant, actually. For example, there's the Munich Security Conference, which organizes an Arctic Roundtable. Since a few years, we even had a discussion in our German Arctic dialogue in the Federal Ministry of Defense, because, of course, also for Germany as a NATO member, security issues in the Arctic are relevant. And of course, our Ministry of Defense looks into that. There are two other forums which I want to mention. One is a forum that's the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, and that is actually something that the Arctic Council initiated, that the Arctic Council helped to set up. So it's an independent, formal, operationally driven organization to foster safe, secure, and environmentally responsible maritime activity in the Arctic. And the last one I want to mention is the dialogue really of the forces, and that is the Arctic Security Forces Roundtable. So where really the generals responsible for the Arctic of the Arctic countries and also some observer countries meet regularly to discuss security issues in the Arctic. I should mention that in that forum, Russia has not been participating in the last years. So the chairmanship of the Arctic Council rotates and changes every 2 years. And at the last meeting in 2021, last year, it was handed over from Iceland to the Russian Federation. But as you all know, due to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the 7 other Arctic countries decided to pause all official meetings of the Arctic Council and subsidiary bodies until further notice. So that means the Arctic Council is currently silent and cannot continue its work due to the situation in Ukraine. Just today, I saw a note from the Arctic Council that the 7 other Arctic countries, so excluding Russia, had a discussion and today announced that they intend to implement a limited resumption of the work in the Arctic, mainly in projects that do not involve participation of the Russian Federation. There are a few other bodies that I want to mention, briefly want to mention in the Arctic, which are also relevant. There is the Barents, and I should say that, of course, all these bodies are also very much affected by the war in the Ukraine. There is the EURES, the Barents Euro-Arctic Council. It's a forum for the governmental cooperation in the Barents Sea, where the cooperation with the Russian Federation has been suspended. There's the Nordic Council, which is only the Nordic countries, so not really affected by this. It's a forum for formal interparliamentary cooperation among the Nordic states. There's the Northern Forum, an interesting organization consisting of subnational and regional governments, which is currently led by the Russian Federation. Their website refers to special military operations. So I just put this up here for your information. And then there's the Muslim Dimensions Program, which is a cooperation, a joint program of the European Union, Iceland, Norway, and Russia, which has also suspended the cooperation with the Russian Federation. And finally, there's the Standing Committee of the Parliamentarians of the Arctic region, so a permanent body of the Conference of Parliamentarians of the Arctic regions and the European Parliament, which is also pausing its activities at the moment. So last 5 minutes, I would like to use talk a bit about what are the possible implications of all the challenges we are seeing, especially of the Arctic Council not continuing its work. It's also relevant, of course, for the Arctic Economic Council, which is not continuing cooperation with Russian institutions. And of course, this has many implications. Just put up one here. This is the map showing the resources of the Arctic. So far, there are many known or, let's say, expected resources, especially oil and gas in the Arctic, that have not been, let's say, financially profitable to exploit. Of course, this could change. We see the oil price going up every day. And of course, especially countries like Norway, who have more resources in the Arctic, are considering to do more on Arctic oil and gas. So it is quite likely that in the future it will make, let's say, you can make profit also from the oil and gas, which is still in the Arctic, but it was so far not profitable. So this is kind of expectable. Another thing, of course, which is important is the shipping in the Arctic. The Northern Sea Route, Russia, during the last years has been very actively promoting the use of the Northern Sea Route and try to get partners into further developing the Northern Sea Route and using the Northern Sea Route through Russian territorial waters. Of course, this is probably not going to happen because European and Western shipping companies will not use the Northern Sea Route, not cooperate with Russia. That's what I would expect on the Northern Sea Route. However, this is of course also relevant for Asian countries, and it could well happen that a country like China would step in and would join with Russia to further develop the Northern Sea Route. It's a bit hard to predictable, but of course things are changing a lot also in terms of the Northern Sea Route. The biggest issue, I think, is of course security. And if you look at the map and you see the NATO countries in the Arctic, you see that the United States, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and Norway are NATO members. And you all know, you heard in the news that Finland and Sweden are about to join the NATO. And then, of course, we're in a situation that the border between NATO and the Russian Federation goes right through the Arctic. And of course, we could end up there where we have been 40 years ago when the Arctic was really a hotspot of Cold War and the playground of all the nuclear submarines. So, yeah, the future is not very bright, but that's what I think we have to expect. So finally, a few words about scientific cooperation. Of course, scientific cooperation is really very much affected from this, let's say, from this situation with Ukraine and suspending Russian institutions from cooperation. So, for example, our Ministry of Education and Research announced that all current activities with Russia are being frozen and subject to critical review. The European Commission decided to suspend the cooperation with Russian entities in research, science, and innovation. International Arctic Science Committee organized the Arctic Science Summit Week in Tromsø just a month ago, and they were forced because this is a Norwegian regulation, to uninvite all Russian participants, and they could not even participate online. University of the Arctic, a network of many universities on a certain Arctic scale, has decided to stop the collaboration between the Arctic and Russian institutions, or pause the collaboration until the situation allows for continuation. And we can go on with this list. The last thing I want to mention is the Arctic Science Ministerial process. The Arctic Science Ministerial process was started by the US in 2016, bringing together 25 ministers of science to discuss joint activities, to discuss priorities, and to identify ways of cooperating in terms of responding to the challenges of the changing Arctic. The second one was in Berlin, organized by Germany, Finland, and the European Union. The third one was in Japan last year, organized by Iceland and Japan. And there was a plan for a fourth one to be organized by France jointly with the Russian Foundation, the Russian Federation. Of course, this is also not going to with France. So the situation in the Arctic has really changed dramatically. So this is, of course, very difficult because half of the Arctic is actually Russian Arctic. So this is, of course, really a problem for any long-term activities. All the observations that we have, many of them are paused now. We have really a problem with continuing or observing networks in the Arctic in many ways. And this is, of course, a problem because the warming of the Arctic and is going to continue. It will not stop. Maybe even get even worse because, of course, also in response to the war, there's more oil and gas produced. Some countries are using more coal, and CO2 emissions are certainly not going down, but rather probably going up. And if you look at the Arctic and see how the sea ice in the Arctic has been disappearing over the last years, especially here in the right corner here, where you see that the old sea ice, the thick sea ice here in red, is almost completely gone already. We know that the Arctic Ocean will be ice free in something like 20 years, or at least for a certain period of time. This is, of course, a problem. And then if we look into the projections of what we have to expect in the next years, here's a fact sheet from the German Climate Consortium, and they predict a global warming of almost 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And now we know that in the Arctic, warming is about 3 times faster. So we can just easily calculate that in the Arctic, this will mean a 10-degree warming by the end of the century, which is, of course, dramatic. So, yeah, the future is open, and it's very hard to predict what will happen over the next months or years. But of course, the issues are still there, and we have to see what we as scientists can do, if there's a role for us. And I want to stop here and hand back to the moderators. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Volker, for this very informative presentation. We have now a comment from our APECS colleagues from EPO, and I also forgot to introduce our 2 APECS colleagues at the beginning. I'm sorry. So EPO is here, and Elena will also then lead the discussion afterwards. Please post all your questions in the chat or use the raise hand function so that we have a good discussion later on. And now, EPO, it's your turn.
First of all, thank you, Volker, for your insightful presentation, and we would like to thank you, EU-PolarNet, for that opportunity to present our views. And on behalf of APECS, we collected comments under 2 questions. The first one is, what's the role of APECS and young scientists in Arctic governance? And the answers are as follows. First of all, governance is an essential term which provides a framework in relation to encompassing notions how political and administrative decisions are made, how governmental systems function, how states are related to societies, why formal and informal institutions are significant while performing work and getting things done. In the case of Arctic governance, 7 fundamental issues have previously been determined as the Arctic 7 Cs, and these are climate, commodities, e-commerce, connectivity, communities, cooperation, and competition. In some cases, early career researchers unawares of different policies and governance may create a void in linking their work with the governance framework. In this process, as a platform working to bridge the gap between polar research and governance, APECS plays a significant role in training and educating future leaders as well as in trust building, while highlighting the necessity to include young researchers into discussions and research projects for diversity of the visions of the future of Arctic governance and development. Therefore, one of the key features of APECS is its inclusion of early career researchers and entities from both non-Arctic and Arctic countries, a fact that further enhances the inclusive global scale collaboration based on scientific communication and cooperation. APECS is a political independent organization uniting multidisciplinary and cross-cultural scientists and enthusiasts. The main request to be involved in APECS activities is a passion for polar regions, which create inclusive atmosphere, free of prejudgments, nationalistics, or any other stereotypes and behavioral cliches, which promotes self-development and hopefully is beneficial for the global polar science. In the time of dramatic political, economic, and social changes, it is very important for emerging scientists, students, and early career researchers to feel support, have access to knowledge, and the ability to communicate, collaborate, and contribute. And as for the second question, which one is, could science diplomacy serve as a mechanism for maintaining cooperation in the Arctic in times of global crisis? And the answer is the following. In 2022, global conflicts deeply impacted cooperation in the Arctic region and raising various concerns about Arctic governance as well. New challenges emerged regarding present and future platforms for collaboration between the variety of actors in the Arctic. As early career scientists, we pose a question about the role of science diplomacy in Arctic governance and its potential for maintaining cooperation in the Arctic, especially in times when partnership between nation states is put on hold. We emphasize a common goal of understanding the Arctic environment that affects all northern nations and communities. And evidently, this includes not only producing scientific knowledge about the Arctic climate, but also addressing a variety of societal issues and human-environment relations from the perspectives of social sciences and humanities, as well as traditional knowledge systems. And in this way, it's important to consider a broad definition of science in science diplomacy that includes social sciences, humanities, and indigenous knowledges. At large, this definition of science in science diplomacy reflects the current trend toward interdisciplinary and increasing focus on human dimensions in Arctic research. To sum up, understanding various aspects of human life in the Arctic environment could be considered a uniting purpose, while science diplomacy, where knowledge of all types serve as a driving force, could provide language and framework for conceptualizing and organizing cross-national collaborations around this task. And we would like to reflect upon dividing factors in the region, which include bureaucratic, economic, and political boundaries. Sciences, arts, and humanities, and indigenous knowledges have the potential to work against these divisions, becoming a uniting power among various actors in the Arctic. And science diplomacy could serve as one of the mechanisms for maintaining collaborations in the areas where national divisions are counterproductive, such as climate change, common societal issues, cultural preservation, and more. Such mechanisms should seek for or create opportunities for collaboration by negotiating those divisions as much as possible. Often, networks and relations established through previous collaborations have to create these opportunities, even on a smaller scale or between local actors. Establishing such networks or relations across borders that would continue to function even in times of crisis constitutes one of the important contributions of science diplomacy to Arctic governance. So, we would like to point out that science diplomacy also serves as a tool for promoting national interests in the Arctic, commonly employed by the Arctic and non-Arctic nation states. As early career scientists, we expressed our concerns about utilizing science for power grabs in the Arctic to avoid the idealistic perception of science diplomacy. The complexity of interactions between national interests and the procedures and goals of scientific and other types of knowledge production should be taken into consideration. There are possibilities for negotiation between two competing trends, hidden or not so hidden geopolitical agendas on one hand, and the attempts to maintain the continuity of cross-national and intergenerational collaborations for relevant knowledge production on the other hand. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, April. And I think Elena will now take over. Elena?
Sure. So we have a few questions in the chat, and also there's a raised hand. But I think I will ask one question from the chat, and maybe later Elster could ask her question. So the first question has to do with the connection between the Arctic science and intelligence, actually. Could science bases, or I would also add polar stations in the Arctic, be the precursors of possible future intelligence activities? And this is from Sabit Alabas. Volker, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I can try. Actually, I don't think so. I don't think so, because most of the science, that's, I think, something that the scientific stations in the Arctic, there are many of them, of course, there are scientific stations. And I cannot speak for all the countries, but I would assume that, at least in the European countries, I think they are used to science. And I don't think that this is an issue that scientific activities will be used for intelligence activities. I don't think so, frankly speaking.
All right, and there's also two questions about Svalbard. The first question is, could the future food crisis be resolved in favor of the US or Russia to use the global seed vault in Svalbard?
So the global seed vault is just an archive of all kinds of different plants that we have, so to conserve them for a longer time. And that, I don't think it can help the food crisis, because the food crisis has other issues. I mean, if there is large amounts of corn, let's say from Ukraine, which cannot be exported because the harbors are blocked, that is the food crisis. And then, of course, using this seed from the global seed vault and Svalbard would not solve the issue. It solves the issue. I mean, if it is meant to be reserved, let's say, if some plants extinct, you still have the seeds, and you have a backup plan. But that's not the problem that we have. The problem is we have enough food, but it's blocked because there's a war in Ukraine, and it's not allowed to be exported. That's the problem.
Thank you. And another question also about Svalbard. Why do you think countries that are geographically distant from the Arctic, such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia, are parties to the Svalbard Treaty?
That's a very good question, which I ask myself sometimes as well. So I can't really answer that. We did some work on Svalbard, and we looked into the Svalbard Treaty and the history of that. And I never really understood why Egypt and Saudi Arabia are part of the treaty. Sorry, I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Volker. And could we allow Elster to ask the question? They have a raised hand.
Joseph, if you want. I think we lost him.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, sorry about that. And I know that Abru had a question that she wanted to ask.
Yeah, thank you very much. And my question is, what's the role of EU-PolarNet in that process? What do you think, Volker?
I mean, of course, firstly, EU-PolarNet is affected by decisions of the European Union to freeze the cooperation with Russia, as well as all the European projects are. Of course, EU-PolarNet's role is to advise the European Commission, also in terms of science, and also what the European Commission should do in terms of supporting science. So, of course, EU-PolarNet could go back with recommendations to the European Union in terms of scientific cooperation, and I'm pretty sure that they will do that. But in terms of the cooperation with Russia, I think this is not really in the hands of the European Parliament. This is of the EU-PolarNet. It's a little higher, so it's a political level. And I also thought about your commentary on science diplomacy, which of course has something to do with that. Of course, the Arctic and maybe are kind of model regions for science diplomacy. And many things that we see in the Arctic, like the Arctic Council, they are very, very much focused on scientific cooperation. And there, of course, the EU-PolarNet is very strong scientific cooperation. But at the moment, of course, this is a different situation because we're not in the Cold War, we're in a war. And that's a different thing. Science diplomacy worked very well in the Cold War, during the Cold War time, and helped to initiate cooperation in the Arctic. Take, for example, the Antarctic Treaty, which is maybe the best example of science diplomacy, because scientific cooperation started the Antarctic Treaty and political cooperation. But we have a different time because we have a war, we don't have the Cold War. So it's a bit more complicated, I think, and using science diplomacy in that kind of time. So, yeah, and I think this is also relevant for EU-PolarNet, I guess. Maybe Nicole can say a few words on that.
Thank you very much.
What you have said, Volker, is totally right. In addition, EU-PolarNet is really a European network of polar organizations, and very little of them are belonging to the Arctic 8. You know, we are more advising the European Commission or European Union than having influence on the Arctic as such. That's certain because most of our partners, and of course also the European Union's role in the Arctic is a bit different than, for example, from the Arctic 8 countries. So that's why Volker is totally correct. We are working on science cooperation, and we would highly appreciate if we could somehow support also the continuation of corporations. I want to be vague here now, but at least also the data gathering in all parts of the Arctic. But we avoid a lot we even do not advise or provide advice to decision makers when they ask us geopolitical questions, because it's in the Arctic. That's a challenging role for an EU project, which we are at the end. Yeah. Are there any more questions from the audience to Volker?
There's no more questions in the chat and no more raised hands here.
There's one coming from Francisco.
Yeah, there's one more. Do you think additional governmental bodies will be established in the near future due to the war in the Ukraine?
No, I don't think so. I mean, first of all, with the Arctic Council, you have the one important body for the Arctic. The question is more what the Arctic Council will be doing and how it will be changing, because the Arctic Council operates on consensus. And if one country will not participate, it doesn't agree, they cannot continue. So, and it doesn't really matter if the Russian Federation is not the chairman, has the chairmanship or not. The Council, according to its mandate and its founding articles and the Ottawa Declaration, cannot continue if one country doesn't want. So this is what this is why I brought up the statement that they issued today, that the Arctic Council, or let's say the 7 other Arctic countries, they're thinking about what kind of models they can use to continue the important work of the Arctic Council without calling themselves Arctic Council. So some kind of an organization which is the Arctic Council, but not called the Arctic Council because Russia is not part of it anymore. And I think that is happening at the moment. That the 7 Arctic countries without Russia are exploring ways to legally correct and profound organize their work and continue their work as the Arctic Council without Russian Federation.
Thank you, Volker. I actually have a question about non-state science diplomacy. Do you think that in the times of global crisis like we have now, non-state actors could still continue their collaborations, particularly in the sciences and probably Arctic humanities somehow?
It's a good question, but the answer is quite simple because in most cases we're not even allowed to do that. So I showed you the statements. my ministry, for example, and the same is for the European Union, the same is for most other Western countries, that cooperation with Russian institutions on institutional level is stopped, paused, and suspended. So that means, of course, there's no institutional cooperation. What, of course, is there, and I think what needs to be there, is continuous dialogue with scientists on a personal level. I think these bridges we should not break these bridges, because their dialogue on long term is, of course, extremely important. But it's, at the same time, it is very difficult and delicate, because we know that for scientists in Russia, this could really create problems. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we do that. But I think in institutional cooperation, like we were used to having it, for example, especially here in Germany, where we had a long history of Russian-German cooperation in the Arctic, is at the moment not possible. And at maximum, there is some personal consultations and personal work, which is important also in terms of, let's say, long-term data sets and how we can preserve these long-term data sets that we need for our models, that we need for forecasts, and so we need the data. And the risk is that everything is lost, and we have a gap in data, which would really be dramatic for any forecasts and models in the Arctic.
Thank you, Volker. There's another question that I think everyone actually wonders about. When do you think the situation on cooperation with Russian Federation go back to normal? Is it completely depends, or does it completely depend on the war in Ukraine, or do you expect an earlier normalization?
I would even expect it takes much longer. It takes much longer because this is such an issue, and I think the other Arctic countries, the other 7 Arctic countries, they were very clear that they will not work with a country that attacks and invades other countries. That is simply not possible. And this is, I think it's my personal opinion is this is a long crisis. And even if the war is over, they will not just forget and say, okay, fine, now half of the Ukraine belongs to the Russian Federation and we can continue. That's not going to work. It'll take much longer, I think. I'm sorry if I'm so blunt and open, but I think we should be open and should understand that this is a long-term thing.
Thank you, Volker. Is there any other questions that we might have from the attendees, or Andrew, do you have another question?
Thank you.
Oh yes, here we go.
Can I say one comment on your other part on APECS? Because I think that was an extremely
Sure, of course, please do.
I think that was an extremely important part. So when I'm asked to talk about success stories in the Arctic, of course, the Arctic Council is a big success story. But in terms of IS, of course, is a big success story. But in the younger history of the Arctic, I think the biggest success story is actually APECS. APECS was initiated by a handful of enthusiastic, highly motivated, very smart young scientists during the International Polar Year. And within just, 15 years, it has become really a leading organization for early career scientists in the polar regions, with, almost 5,000 members, very dynamic and successful organizations. And you can already see that these former leaders of APECS are now leaders of other organizations, so they take over. So from that point of view, I think that is something we should think about, also in terms of the future, of how we work in the Arctic in the future. In your group, you really what APECS motto is: you shape the future of the Arctic. So, and of course, you generate the leaders for the next 10, 20 years. And of course, that context is very important, also in terms of the crisis and challenges we have at the moment. So I think that's important to note.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Volker. I also would like to add that it's actually great that social sciences and humanists and artists actually are included in this organization. So as a social scientist myself, I really appreciate that. And disarmament. Today, Russia, the United States, and the whole world can be threatened to use nuclear weapons. From this perspective, how long can the Arctic remain unclaimed?
The Arctic is not really unclaimed. I mean, there's only the international waters that I talked about. I mean, this nuclear threat has been there since many, many years. It was always on a pretty low level. Yeah. And I think it's now, for the first time since, I don't know, since the Cuba crisis in the 60s, that one of the nuclear powers in the world really threatens the world with using nuclear weapons. And that's what the Russian Federation did. And that's, of course, a new thing that we haven't had that for 50 years. What is that? 60 years. Yeah, 60 years, and that has, of course, changed things. And I mean, this is also, of course, I would guess also behind the interest of Sweden and Finland to become NATO partners, just to protect themselves. From that point of view, I think what happened in Ukraine has really changed the world, not only the Arctic, but the whole world. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question? Yes. Imagine there's an emergency like a major oil spill, similar to what happened at the time with Norilsk in May 2020. Would it be possible to do any emergency and rescue work? Maybe it is time to get an emergency response team Arctic-wide.
It's a very good question. Very good question. Of course, this agreement on search and rescue and oil spill is still relevant. It was signed by the 8 Arctic countries, so it's still there. On the other hand, it's hard to predict what would happen at the current time if something happens in the Arctic, if the Arctic countries would still cooperate, because they have this agreement, which is, of course not, it's not common. Yeah, but it's hard to foresee. I don't know how that would work. For example, I just heard that the Russian Federation is expanding their own emergency and search and rescue capabilities and trying to become more autark, be more independent. So it is hard to predict. I would guess that the conflict will also spill over to those kind of activities.
All right. Thank you, Volker. Okay, someone is saying that they sent you questions privately as a message in the chat. I'm not sure Volker is able to read them right now.
Yeah, I can see them.
So if you don't mind, Elena, would you be able to post them here in the chat?
No, I see them. They're here. They're
Okay, great.
questions and answers. Okay, sorry, I couldn't see that. I had to open this window first. So, new Nordic Plus versus existing Arctic Council. Russia is even the chair still. Would it be operational without major influence on the 30% of the Arctic area? Okay, I guess the question refers to let's say a new Arctic Council without Russia, if that would be also any influence for the Russian territory. I don't think so, because why should it? I mean, the Arctic Council, the way Arctic Council works, it makes recommendations for the member countries, and then it's up to the country to implement them in their territory. And if Russia is not part of this process anymore, the recommendations from the other set are not relevant anymore. So I would guess that would not be the case. Was that the question? I hope.
Yes, we hope so. All right, there's no more questions in the chat. Yeah, thank you everyone for your questions, and I guess I will hand it back to Nicole.
Yeah, thank you, Elena, and thank you, April, and big thank you to Volker for the, as I said, very informative and excellent presentation. I hope all of you have learned something today. I like the webinar very much, and as I said, thank you, and special thanks also goes to Anneli, who has organized this webinar a bit from behind. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elena and Ebru, also for really helpful and very, very good contributions. So thank you.
Yeah.
It was really enjoyable. Thanks, Nicole and Anneli.
Bye-bye.
Bye.